Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jos Polin, and I'm a professor and center director here at the Graduate Institute. Delighted to host the Right Honourable Liam Fox today. I must say, Dr. Fox, we've been trying for the last year or so to have an official UK voice come and talk to us about the UK and trade. It took us a while, but now we have the Minister himself here with us. People in the audience may have noticed that in the past year or so we've had, I think, a dozen or so trade ministers come to speak at the Graduate Institute, so we are very honored to have these people come by. We started off with EU Trade Commissioner Malmström about a year ago. Had Mike Froman talk to us, outgoing USTR. A few months ago we had the Argentine Trade Minister, and just the day before yesterday the Indian Trade Minister. So I think there's a real interest to share with the public ideas about the so-called backlash against globalization, how nations operate within the WTO, and here at the Graduate Institute we feel honored that people choose us to have these debates. If I can just say a few words about our speaker today, because we have very little time and I would really like to get some Q&A going. You have the bio of Dr. Fox here, but just a few highlights. Dr. Fox is a medical doctor by training, University of Glasgow, and has been a member of Parliament since 1992. He has fulfilled a number of very prominent roles within the Conservative Party, chairman of the party, has also been Secretary of State for Defence, and has been the first occupant of the position created last year, Secretary of State for International Trade. So we are delighted to have you here, and hope you'll have some time for Q&A after this, but let me give you the floor first. Dr. Fox. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I hope you can hear me at the back. Sort of. Well, it's a great pleasure for me to be here at such a prestigious venue, and thank you very much for making that happen for us. The United Kingdom is opening a new chapter in its history. For us, our departure from the European Union is about setting our sights wider and embracing the realities and opportunities of globalization. We're not turning our back on Europe. The 27 nations of the European Union will remain our close allies on defence, on security, and on trade. The United Kingdom will not abandon our commitments to our European partners, and the UK will always work tirelessly to protect our mutual interests. But Britain has chosen to embrace a wider world. The fact that trade, prosperity, and globalisation are inextricably bound together is hardly a revelation. The Silk Road, the earliest and for centuries the most successful paradigm of international trade, flourished not only through the movement of goods, but through the transfer of cultures, ideas, and scientific advances that flowed along its length. It's a pattern that we see repeated today. The world may have changed beyond all recognition, yet the benefits brought by free and open trade, not only in jobs, technology, and prosperity, but in arts, literature, and science, would be instantly recognizable to our predecessors. The lesson of history is, I believe, unequivocal. Free and open trade is fundamentally beneficial to humankind. But as history ebbs and flows, we have sometimes forgotten this message. In the 1930s, nation-states and great economies across the world turned their backs on one another, closed their markets, closed their minds, and succumbed to protectionism. It was not until the 1940s, when the old order had been shattered by global conflict, that these lessons could be relearned. It's a source of pride in the UK that it was in London that the architects of what would become the Havana Charter gathered in the aftermath of World War II, rededicating themselves to the purpose of creating a world that was more open and more interconnected, more stable and more secure than the generation that had preceded it. At that time, one of my predecessors as president of the Board of Trade, Sir Stafford Cripps, opened the meeting by observing that the world had experimented long enough with the chaotic conditions that existed after the First World War. The time had come to establish some degree of organisation to world trade, and the world, as he saw it, was full of good intentions, but had signally failed to translate them into wise actions. Those who met in London then foresaw that their task would not be easy. Nations would have to face down vested and special interests to abandon the old protectionist certainties and commit to trading liberalizations in pursuit of a greater good. We've come a long way since the London PrepCom. The resulting general agreement on tariffs and trade proved its worth as a stabilizing influence on the development of global trading practices, and it became the crucible of the international rules-based trading order. Countries, at first relatively few, but increasing over time, began to dismantle the barriers that had hindered trade in the interwar period. Progressive rounds of pro-free trade agreements went side by side with a dramatic expansion in global trade, and wealth and the development of technologies came in its wake. Jobs, companies, industries were continually remodeled as private enterprise boomed and global GDP grew rapidly. On the 1st of January 1995, the UK, along with 124 others, created an organization to protect and advance the ideas behind the Havana Charter. This continued the liberalization of the trade in goods, but also extended the scope to include agriculture and, for the first time, services and intellectual property. Underpinning all of these advances was the creation of a dedicated dispute settlement system, a forum where disagreements between member states could be resolved by cooperation. To the United Kingdom, a nation that has for centuries been dedicated to the principles of free trade, the World Trade Organization retains both a vital symbolic and practical significance. It is not only the home of the rules-based international system for global trade that has been the foundation of our post-war prosperity, but the repository of our values, resolutely championing free trade in the face of setbacks and opposition. And while they may be difficult to achieve, all of us in this room, I hope, recognize that in this system, multilateral agreements are the gold standard of trade agreements. Fundamentally, they offer a common platform of rules and a guaranteed minimum level of market access for all trading partners. They are the simplest for companies to navigate, and perhaps because of this, they offer the greatest economic and social benefits. The international trading system that we created in 1995 may be in need of some refurbishment, but our commitment to its fundamental goals and principles remain unshaken. The UK has been a WTO member since the organisation's inception, and I'm proud to say here today that the UK remains, to its core, committed to multilateralism and to the WTO. While much political activity in Europe has been focused on Brexit, it's essential that we don't lose sight of the big picture and the potential for all of us to benefit from another round of liberalisation under the WTO. The organisation and the wider cause of global free trade will face formidable challenges, but they will find no firmer ally than the United Kingdom. For all that the WTO has contributed to the advancement of free trade, its existence cannot be taken for granted. Barriers to trade are difficult to eradicate, and a particularly worrying report recently has highlighted the acceleration in protectionist measures since the 2008 financial crash. Fortunately, the WTO has often proved adept at renewing itself, a power incorporated into the Marrakesh Agreement. It has, for example, been strikingly successful in expanding the global reach of its rules, and membership of the club retains a certain cachet for those nations aspiring to a greater role in international affairs. And as such, the WTO has extended to near universal coverage, which is a truly historic and remarkable achievement. Another method of renewal has been through multilateral or plurilateral negotiation, and again there have been some striking successes. The Trade Facilitation Agreement, reducing the bureaucracy faced by companies at the borders and saving them crucial money and time, was a major achievement. And the extension of coverage of the Information Technology Agreement, so that now more than 10% of global trade is tariff-free, was another significant step forward. And as well as recent successes, we have ongoing talks to tackle key global issues. For example, there are plurilateral negotiations underway which aim to help tackle climate change through the liberalization of trade in environmentally friendly goods. And additionally, some WTO members have also been engaged in negotiations on what should be the most ambitious services agreement to date. Yet, for all our achievements, we must recognize that some of our ambitions to go further and faster remain unrealized. Many of the goals that we as ministers set ourselves when we gathered in Doha remain unfulfilled. The world has moved on since 2001, and the WTO and other organizations must strive to keep up with the times. The last 16 years have seen a fundamental shift in the geography of international trade as economies develop and new markets emerge to change the center of gravity. This has been driven, at least in part, by emerging technologies and the digital revolution. Given that businesses across the world are increasingly turning to e-commerce, the WTO must be able to meet the needs of a digitally powered global economy. It's a change for which we must all adapt and prepare. It would be inconceivable, for example, to begin a new series of multilateral negotiations today that would not mention or cover digital trade. But we have taken some bold steps, and at the 11th Ministerial Conference in Buenos Aires and beyond, we should challenge ourselves to adopt similarly bold measures to refurbish those elements of the multilateral architecture that are perhaps showing their age the most, recommitting ourselves to the principle of a robust, rules-based international trading system. The United Kingdom is fully committed to the WTO. We are already, as I said, a full member with all the responsibilities that entails, and we will continue to be so after our exit from the European Union. And as one of the world's major economies, we must be prepared not only to help the global rules-based system to adapt to the wider challenges, but also to lead by example, using our influence to work to advance the cause of free trade and prepare the system for the economic challenges of the 21st century. And to do so, we will have to use all the available options. For all the benefits that free trade agreements have brought to international trade, they are far from the only tools at our disposal, and we must use them all, from mutual recognition agreements to ministerial dialogues to trade working groups and greater cross-border facilitation. For the UK, the future of global trade will largely be shaped by three things: the digital economy, the promotion of trade as the main tool of development, and unlocking the vast potential of trade and services. In all of these areas, the WTO has the potential to set the agenda, ensuring that such developments are approached in a way that remains both mutually beneficial and dedicated to the principles and values of the organisation. From the UK's perspective, we want to see modern and ambitious digital provisions in trade, including around e-commerce, data and telecommunications. Not only do these areas constitute the cutting edge of international trade, but their far-reaching support for consumers and businesses make them a cornerstone of future prosperity. And it's a telling fact that the principal rules of the WTO have not been significantly updated since 1994, when the internet was barely in its infancy. With successful adaptation, the WTO has the opportunity to lead and shape economic governance of new technology. On the digital economy, we are working with other WTO member states to achieve a positive outcome at the Ministerial Conference in December in Argentina. And this includes the UK working with developing and least developed countries as a core supporter of UNCTAD's E-Trade for All initiative, which seeks to improve the ability of developing countries to benefit from e-commerce. The digital economy, and e-commerce in particular, is a key driver to wider economic growth. It's vital that digital discussions in the Trade Forum should keep the development and inclusiveness agenda firmly in mind. Safeguarding the access of developing countries to digital trade should reflect a wider dedication to economic development and poverty elimination. After all, trade is a key driver of economic growth and development, helping to raise incomes, create jobs, and lift people out of poverty. Take India as a single example, and I know my colleague, Minister Sitaraman, was here earlier this week. In 1993, around 45% of India's population sat below the poverty line as defined by the World Bank. In 2011, that was down to 22%. And it's no coincidence that in the intervening period, India embraced globalization and started to liberalize its economy. And it's hard to imagine an international aid program, even one as generous as the United Kingdom's, that would or could ever have been so effective. That's why we recognize that trade and development form a fundamental and synergistic partnership. Trade flourishes where there are high levels of education, developed financial sectors, and hugely importantly, sound governance with minimal corruption. It is critical that trade works for all WTO members. We remain committed to ensuring least developed countries and other developing countries can harness the formidable power of trade to reduce poverty, which is why on the 25th of June we announced that as we leave the EU, we will secure existing duty-free access to UK markets for the world's poorest countries and aim to maintain current access for other developing countries which benefit from reduced or zero tariffs. And this is where the WTO's own trade facilitation agreement has the potential to benefit developing economies. Yet by far the greatest prize within our reach is the liberalization of the global trade in services. Arguably, service-based economies derive less benefit from the current architecture for trade than those trading in goods. And for the most advanced economies, such as the UK, where almost 80% of our economic activity is services-based, we need trading partners who are functionally similar, not necessarily geographically proximate. But most of all, we need markets that are genuinely open. Many of the developed nations, including the United States, are seeing rapid growth in services as a proportion of their economic output and of their international trade. This has been matched by a similar growth in demand for services as developing nations around the world produce increasingly sophisticated economic outputs. And if we're to unlock the full growth potential of the world economy, then it's imperative that we give the WTO the tools to liberalize this trade, allowing them to lift barriers and open new markets for service companies around the world. And that's why the United Kingdom fully supports the resumption of TISA negotiations at the earliest opportunity. The Trade and Services Agreement has the potential to set the standard in the trade of services globally. It will not only offer an improved trading baseline for advanced economies, but it will also allow developing nations access to services sectors that will nurture their maturing economies. And it's not even just in economics where we will see the benefits. For the prosperity that trade can create is the basis for social stability that in turn can underpin political stability. And that political stability in its turn underpins our collective security. In other words, free trade and global security are part of the same continuum, and you cannot disrupt one element without disrupting the whole. It is a truth that we all need to understand in this interdependent, globalized era. Britain, as an independent WTO member, will always defend and champion the cause of free trade and market access for those economies that require it most. And finally, if we are to remain committed to the multilateral trading system, we must also rededicate ourselves to the dispute resolution system. Fundamentally, we begin from the perspective that the system works. We recognize, and I would like to pay tribute to the challenging and important work conducted by the panels, the appellate body, and the WTO Secretariat in assessing compliance with our shared WTO commitments. Yet, we must remain vigilant and ensure that we have an effective and efficient mechanism in place for resolving disputes between members that crucially commands the confidence of all WTO members. We stand ready to address these issues through the EU until we become an independent member in 2019. It has been rightly said that if the WTO did not exist today, we would have to invent it. In the period prior to the establishment of the GATT, there was no lack of understanding to the value of free trade, nor did we ignore the link between economic prosperity and political stability. The issue was a lack of political willingness to translate those good intentions into wise actions. All of us here accept how vital the continued existence of the WTO is to the survival of free trade, but such is the importance of its task that the organisation must never stop making the case for its own existence, nor shy away from promoting its own achievements. Globalisation has eliminated many of the barriers of distance and time that once separated nations. As the global economy shifts towards services, knowledge, and digital trade, the geographical proximity that underpins the traditional trading bloc will become less relevant. It's incumbent upon all developed nations to extend the benefits of free trade to emerging economies and offer them a route to prosperity. That is why it is so concerning to hear the voices of protectionism growing louder in parts of the globe. Research by the OECD shows that protectionist trends have been growing since the financial crisis of 2008. In 2010, G7 and G20 countries were estimated to be operating some 300 non-tariff barriers to trade. By 2015, this had mushroomed to over 1,200. Those countries who have benefited most from an open, liberal trading environment have a duty to ensure that others are able to take advantage of the same benefits in future. We cannot have the richest countries silting up the global trading system. After all, such actions are not simply altruistic. It develops the trade partners of the future and allows developed nations to build links to those economies that will become the future drivers of global growth. This principle underpins our pursuit of free trade. It's unlikely that a system failure of the WTO would result in a full return to 1930s style destructive protectionism. Yet without its moderating influence, we would likely see the re-emergence of raw power politics with trade relationships governed by disorder and discrimination. And that vision of the future will, I hope, add some urgency to our actions as we face the scale of the task before us. We're experiencing a period of rapid and sometimes bewildering change. But within this challenge lies opportunity. On the digital economy, on services and on development, the WTO has the chance to take the initiative and gain the ability to shape the global trading environment. And on my visit today, I'm here to offer the United Kingdom as a staunch ally in that process, a committed WTO member, and where necessary, a catalyst to change as we rise together to face the challenges of the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Fox. So I think we have about 10 minutes for Q&A, which is wonderful. I'll take a couple of questions and then have the Minister answer them, and then perhaps go for a second round if we have the time. Please raise your hand if you have a question and state your affiliation. I see one over here and one over there. Over there, if you can, yeah, please. And then one further down, the gentleman. Oh, you've got one.
I'm Jennifer Friedman with MLEX. I have two questions, actually. One has to do with your comments about the services agreement. It's one thing to support the resumption of negotiations on TISA, but how realistic do you think that that really is? My second question has to do with the basis that you expect the UK and the EU to settle the issue of TRQs. Thank you.
Okay, just take a few. The gentleman over there.
Hello, my name is John Bradbeer. I've been working with the University of Leicester. I wanted to ask, is the UK looking for closer trade links with North Africa in the near future and as post-Brexit? Thank you.
And then perhaps a third one here. So I can give you my microphone. Speed things up. Please go ahead.
Being from a country or represent a country with a significant media sector and banking sector, do you think that services is a concept which has any meaning?
Does that give you enough food, or let's try and go with those questions first?
Well, let's on the specific questions. I do think there is. Some political will to get TISA moving, but we do need to give it a push, and we think that getting the process back underway is hugely important, and it's important because if you look at what's happening in global trade at the moment, the rate of growth of global trade has now dropped to about 1.3%. The rate of growth of global GDP is about 2.5%. Normally, that relationship is inverted. We're seeing far slower growth in global trade than we're seeing in global GDP. So we have to provide some impetus back into that system. We can't see global trade growing as slowly as it is now. And as I said, we've seen an increased number of non-tariff barriers going up. It's time to start reversing the process. And I hope that we can begin a genuine conversation now about the need, in a global sense, to get further liberalisation. As we leave the European Union, one of the issues that, of course, we have to deal with is the disaggregation of the EU quotas and our TRQs. We've always been quite clear about the approach that we would take to that. Now, there were those who said, when you leave the EU, will you divide it by 28? Will you divide it by 15, which was what you had when you came in? And we said that's not a sensible way forward. The sensible way forward is to look at the market access question. So, for example, how much New Zealand lamb has actually come into the United Kingdom. Let's average that out over a period of years, 3 years, and we will make that our baseline quota. Because to do so doesn't disadvantage their producers, it doesn't disadvantage our producers, or disadvantage our consumers, and in turn means that we will not likely to be taken to dispute on the grounds of harm at WTO. So it seems to me a sensible, rational way of going forward. There are consequences about what the EU does with the remaining quota, whether it reduces it by that amount, but that's not an issue for the United Kingdom. But I think that what has made the process of our technical rectification of schedules at WTO relatively straightforward is that we set out from the very beginning what we intended to do, the pace at which we intended to do it, and how we would consult during the process. And we've done all those things. So I think that that's the way, by maintaining transparency and openness, to get the maximum ability to cooperate. Yes, we would like to see an increase in trade with North Africa, but of course that is partly dependent upon improvements in the geopolitics of the region and getting the stability upon which the economic growth and the ability to deliver as a partner in any trading relationship really matters, which is why I made the point that I do from time to time, travelling around the world, see those who think they can choose between the prosperity agenda and the security agenda, and they are the same agenda. We need to see that as a continuum. And I think if we do, it actually guides our activity in a much more positive way, because governments have a tendency to conduct policy in silos, that foreign policy is here, trade policy is here, economic policy is here, defence policy is here. We cannot allow ourselves the luxury, if you want to call it that, of a position like that, and recognise that we have to be far more interdepartmental in government. And that goes for the UK as far as anybody else. And as for what do we call the substrata of services? Well, you know, I don't really mind what we call them, frankly. I mind that we liberalise them because that's the key end state. And it's, of course, very important for the UK on things like financial services. But if I'm looking to where the UK can make the greatest gain, do we make it by getting further liberalisation of goods in future FTAs, or would we get a bigger bang for the buck by getting a global round of service liberalisation. I wouldn't like to choose between them, and clearly we're going to try to promote both, but I see the latter as providing the greater benefit of scale.
Yes, but excuse me, the British universities, press agencies, movie can keep a good name even with a closed United Kingdom, and the banks, British banks, can have a bad name even with an open United Kingdom.
Okay, let's take a few more questions if we can. I see one there,
Yes.
and one at the back.
Thank you very
I think
much.
we'll have to stop.
Thank you very much for a very insightful and open discussion. Derek Quest, Dr. Kalba. Two brief questions. How do you perceive the UK industry evolving in the next 10 years based on those new rules of the game you're defining? Meaning what type of competencies, know-how will develop, evolve, you'll be able to share on a multilateral basis? And as we are in Switzerland, another champion of multilateralism, how do you see partnerships or dialogue evolving with Switzerland going forward? Thank you.
Thank you. I saw one here.
Bryce Bashik with Bloomberg BNA. Thank you for your comments. Wanted to ask you about what's the state of the UK's rectification approach here at the WTO, and what are the benchmarks and timelines going forward for the rest of the year? Thank you.
And two quick ones in the back and then here in the front.
Thank you. My name is Jin Dong Kim from Korean Mission. After the election, there are renewed debate on the form of the Brexit. So at the end of the day, is Brexit going to be hard or soft, and how much? And what's your vision on that? Thank you.
So,
Well, Your Excellency, you mentioned about India's improvement of the poverty. Can you please see this Commonwealth program which is going to take place next year in UK? We'd like to know the Hinduja group of companies would like to very much contribute into the programs of the British India, who have been the longest in Africa for so many years, how we could help the African world, who have been really suffering in the poverty, and the developing countries and the developed countries should create a priority by using the institutions like World Bank, Exim banks, or a different institution to how to build up the economy of the African world. So Commonwealth can play a very important role this year. And the next year is the British, the Queen's is planning to have after Malta, this will be the biggest one in Britain. I'd like to have your views on that what type of a model you could create there, which world can recognize that this is happening for the future. Thank you.
if I can just add a footnote to the question about your WTO progress here, I've noticed that you will start negotiations with the US next week on an FTA. Is that the kind of forum where you would push first your agenda, the agenda you mentioned on digital trade, services? I'm sorry, you have a whole bunch of questions now, but we only have a few minutes.
Yes,
please.
It's about a 1 hour lecture in 5 minutes. Well, how is the UK economy going to develop? It's impossible to say over a decade what it looks like. But what we have seen is the explosion of tech in the UK recently. And we've seen the emergence of fintech, for example, which I think will be a disruptive technology that will reshape or evolve a lot of our financial services sector, which I think is probably a good thing. And Switzerland is a very key partner for us in much of the agenda that we've set. In fact, one of the very first discussions I had was with my Swiss counterpart. We have a trade working group set up to see how we can replicate, first of all, the EU agreements with Switzerland in UK law as we leave the European Union to make sure there's no disruption of trade. But then we'll want to see where we have overlapping agendas, which I think is quite considerable, given the shape of our economies and where we might act together. So I see Switzerland as an important partner for the UK in the years ahead. How fast would we like to go at WTO and technical rectification? Well, fast enough to have them done before we leave the European Union, which is approaching more quickly than many people imagined it would. And when we come back in Parliament when we come back after Christmas, that is our last year in the European Union. 2018 will be our last full year. and we have to get a lot of the legal work done, not just WTO rectification. We also need to get the EU FTAs negotiated into UK law. We need to look at the ones that are not yet fully ratified, but we will want again to replicate them in the UK, and that's before we even start on any future FTA work. So as quickly as possible, I think, is probably the diplomatic answer, and it's probably as much detail as you'll get out of me. As for the question on Brexit, and I couldn't quite hear the question.
From the Korean mission, yes.
Sorry, my question was, at the end of the day, do you imagine that Brexit is going to be hard or soft?
Yes.
And how much, and what's your vision on that? Thank you.
Well, I make it a general rule not to use any adjectives before the word Brexit, other than successful. When we think about it, the free trade agreement that Britain will ultimately have to negotiate with the European Union should be the easiest FTA in the history of mankind, because we begin with 0 tariffs and 100% regulatory equivalence. No one has ever begun an FTA negotiation from that position. And the only reason that we wouldn't get as open an agreement as we have today is if politics gets in the way of economics and common sense. And I hope that the driver will not be political ideology in this process, but the well-being of our people. And it's more than just Europe, because we are not conducting the negotiations in a political or economic vacuum. The introduction of impediments to trade or investment in Europe that don't exist today will make Europe as a whole, to a degree, less competitive globally, and is likely to have an impact on that global economy. So we should remember our global obligations when we're having those discussions. And as for the Commonwealth, well, we held the Commonwealth Trade meeting in London. Commonwealth countries are, of course, very disparate economically, but we can introduce a level of commonality in that. The United Kingdom is engaged with India at the moment on a trade audit. And what we said was, each country gave the other 9 months to come up with a document that sets out the perceived impediments to doing business with the other. So at the end of September, India and the United Kingdom will exchange, hopefully on time, documents where India says what they believe the perceived impediments to doing business with Britain are, and we will set out the reverse. I think there's a very good case in the Commonwealth for introducing a standard measuring tool like that, so that countries can see just how free market or otherwise they are. It's all very well to talk about free trade agreements, but you have to be at a level of some sort of compatibility in the shape of your economy to make that happen. So I think that would be a good idea. And what could we do for Africa? Well, one of my pet subjects is that we could stop putting tariffs on value-added goods coming out of Africa. To be in a position where Germany makes more money exporting coffee than the African producers of the coffee beans do, says that there's something wrong in there. And removal of common external tariffs on value-added goods coming from developing countries would be a very good signal for us to send about our sincerity. And finally on the US, well, everybody's focused on free trade agreements. In fact, if you listen to the UK media, you would think there was nothing else in trade other than free trade agreements, that we have no other tools at our disposal. So we have a number of work streams with the US. We're looking at how we can get quick improvements bilaterally using the tools available to us. We're looking at the continuity agreements, which we have with the United States as a party, as a member of the European Union at the present time, and how we ensure market stability and market access when we leave. And of course we will want to look at the scoping out of a free trade agreement in the future, because we're not allowed to negotiate and conclude agreements while we're still in the European Union. And we'll want to look at how we can take a common view of wider global trade liberalization issues. It's very important that we keep the United States orientated towards an open, free trading approach because it is the world's biggest economy and what happens there will affect everybody else. So I think that directing the debate away from some of the protectionist noises into a free market, rules-based debate is a very important discussion for us to have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Minister Fox. I wish you a lot of success on your Geneva trip and the many Geneva trips to come, I hope. Thank you so much. Please join me.